Marcus Rodriguez pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air as the distant groans of the undead echoed through the abandoned city streets. 6 months had passed since the outbreak began, and what started as isolated incidents in major metropolitan areas had quickly spiraled into a global catastrophe that brought civilization to its knees. The former Marine sergeant adjusted his tactical vest and checked his ammunition count for the third time in 10 minutes, a nervous habit he'd developed since joining the resistance movement known as Operation Last Hope. Through his radio earpiece, he could hear the steady breathing of his team members positioned at various points around the massive pharmaceutical complex that towered before them like a concrete monument to humanity's former glory. Dr. Amanda Walsh, the brilliant virologist who had become their de facto leader, had discovered through intercepted government communications that this facility contained the original research data for the experimental virus that had somehow escaped containment and transformed nearly 70% of the world's population into flesh-hungry monsters. Jake Thompson, their demolitions expert and former Navy SEAL, was positioned on the building's east side with enough C4 to level a city block, while Rebecca Martinez, their reconnaissance specialist, had already infiltrated the building's ventilation system to scout for both zombie threats and the location of the secure servers they desperately needed to access. The plan was simple in theory but terrifyingly complex in execution: penetrate the facility, retrieve the research data that might hold the key to developing a cure, and extract before the massive horde of zombies that surrounded the building like a living siege could overwhelm their position. Intelligence reports suggested that over 10,000 infected had gravitated toward the complex, drawn by some unknown force that Dr. Walsh theorized might be connected to the electromagnetic signals still being transmitted from the facility's emergency broadcasting system. Marcus checked his watch and realized they had less than 4 hours before sunset, when the zombies would become significantly more active and aggressive, transforming from the relatively sluggish daytime threats into the nightmarish predators that had earned them the nickname Night Runners among the surviving population. Through his scope, he could see Danny Chen positioned in the sniper's nest they'd established in the adjacent building, his rifle trained on the main entrance where at least 50 zombies wandered aimlessly between abandoned vehicles and debris. The team had spent 3 weeks planning this mission, studying satellite imagery, monitoring zombie movement patterns, and gathering intelligence about the facility's layout from Lisa Johnson, a former security guard who had escaped during the initial outbreak and joined their group 2 months earlier. She had provided invaluable information about the building's security systems, emergency protocols, and most importantly, the location of the underground laboratory where the research team had been working on what they called Project Genesis before everything went catastrophically wrong. Marcus remembered the briefing where Dr. Walsh had explained that the original research had been focused on developing a revolutionary treatment for degenerative neurological diseases, but somewhere in the process, the scientists had accidentally created something far more sinister. The virus didn't just attack the brain's higher functions, it rewired the entire nervous system, creating creatures that retained enough motor function to be incredibly dangerous while stripping away everything that made them human. As he waited for the signal to begin their assault, Marcus thought about the small community of survivors they'd left behind at their base camp, a fortified settlement built into an abandoned mining complex in the mountains where nearly 200 people had managed to create something resembling normal life despite the chaos surrounding them. Children still played in the makeshift school that former teacher Patricia Williams had established, while engineers like Robert Davis worked tirelessly to maintain their power grid and communication systems. These people were counting on them to return with the information that might finally give humanity a fighting chance against the seemingly endless hordes of infected that continued to spread across the continent. The radio crackled to life as Rebecca's voice whispered through the static, reporting that she had successfully reached the target floor and identified at least 30 zombies wandering the corridors between them and their objective. She described seeing evidence of a significant battle that had taken place during the evacuation, with barricaded doors, makeshift weapons, and the kind of defensive positions that suggested the facility's staff had fought desperately to contain the outbreak before ultimately succumbing to the very monsters they had inadvertently created. Marcus felt the familiar mixture of determination and dread that preceded every major operation, knowing that success would bring them one step closer to potentially saving what remained of humanity, while failure would likely mean not just their deaths, But the loss of the best chance anyone had discovered to understand and possibly reverse the plague that had transformed the world into a living nightmare where the dead refused to stay buried and the living fought desperately for each new dawn. The signal came at exactly 1400 hours when Dr. Walsh's voice crackled through their communication system with the simple word, execute, and Marcus immediately moved from his position, sprinting across the debris-filled courtyard while Jake's controlled explosions created multiple entry points along the building's perimeter. The sound of shattering glass and crumbling concrete was immediately followed by the bone-chilling moans of hundreds of zombies as they began converging on the noise, their shuffling movements becoming increasingly frantic as the scent of living humans reached their deteriorated senses. Rebecca's voice guided them through the chaos, her position in the ventilation system giving her a bird's-eye view of the zombie movements as she directed the team through the safest corridors toward their primary objective. Marcus kicked down a partially barricaded door and found himself face to face with 3 zombies that had once been security guards, their uniforms torn and stained with dried blood, their eyes completely white and vacant as they immediately turned toward him with outstretched arms and snapping jaws. His suppressed rifle dispatched them with precise headshots before they could alert the larger groups that Rebecca reported were gathering in the main lobby, and he quickly moved past their crumpling bodies while trying not to think about the fact that these creatures had once been people with families, dreams, and normal lives before the virus turned them into mindless predators. Danny's sniper rifle provided crucial overwatch as the team advanced, his shots eliminating zombies that threatened to flank their position while Jake methodically cleared each room with military precision, using his combat knife whenever possible to avoid the noise that would attract additional threats. The pharmaceutical complex was a maze of sterile corridors and laboratory spaces that had been transformed into a horror scene of overturned equipment, shattered specimens, and the unmistakable evidence of desperate last stands fought by scientists and security personnel who had realized too late that their research had doomed them all. Dr. Walsh moved with surprising agility for someone who had spent most of her career in academic settings, her medical knowledge proving invaluable as she identified key areas where the research team might have stored backup data or emergency protocols. Lisa's inside knowledge of the building layout proved accurate as they navigated through service corridors and emergency stairwells that allowed them to bypass the major concentrations of zombies, though the constant sound of scratching, moaning, and shuffling footsteps reminded them that they were surrounded by hundreds of creatures that would tear them apart given the slightest opportunity. The team reached the 7th floor laboratory where the original research had been conducted, only to discover that someone had attempted to destroy the primary computer systems, leaving behind a scene of smashed servers and burned documents that suggested the facility's staff had tried to prevent their work from falling into the wrong hands. Rebecca's voice suddenly became urgent as she reported massive zombie movement throughout the building, with groups of infected beginning to organize in ways that defied their previous understanding of zombie behavior, almost as if they were responding to some kind of collective intelligence that was coordinating their movements. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's broken heating system as he realized they might be dealing with something far more dangerous than the mindless creatures they had encountered in previous missions. Dr. Walsh worked frantically to access the backup systems, her fingers flying across keyboards as she attempted to bypass security protocols and access the encrypted files that might contain the research data they desperately needed. Jake positioned himself at the laboratory's entrance, his automatic weapon trained on the corridor where the sounds of approaching zombies grew steadily louder, while Danny's voice crackled through the radio with warnings about large groups of infected entering the building from multiple directions. The doctor's excited whisper indicated she had successfully accessed a portion of the research database, but what she found there made her face turn pale as she realized the true scope of what the facility had been working on before the outbreak occurred. The virus hadn't been an accident at all, but rather the result of deliberate experimentation that had been designed to create enhanced human capabilities, with the zombie transformation being an unintended but predictable consequence that the research team had apparently anticipated and tried to weaponize. As Rebecca reported that the zombies were beginning to move with coordinated precision that suggested they were being directed by some form of hive intelligence, Marcus realized their mission had just become exponentially more dangerous and that the information they were gathering might be the key not just to developing a cure, but to understanding that humanity was facing an enemy far more sophisticated and terrifying than anyone had previously imagined, making their escape from the facility not just a matter of survival, but potentially the difference between hope and the complete extinction of the human race. Dr. Walsh's hands trembled as she downloaded the classified files, her medical training allowing her to quickly parse through the technical jargon that revealed the horrifying truth about Project Genesis and the deliberate manipulation of human DNA that had created not just zombies, but what the research notes referred to as neural network hosts, capable of sharing consciousness across vast distances. Marcus watched in growing alarm as the sounds from the corridor changed from random moaning to something that resembled coordinated communication, with different groups of zombies responding to calls and signals in patterns that suggested they were operating under unified command rather than acting on individual hunger instincts. Jake's position at the laboratory entrance became increasingly precarious as he reported seeing zombies moving with military-like precision, positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the corridor system as if they were preparing for a coordinated assault rather than the chaotic mob attacks the team had previously encountered. Rebecca's voice carried a note of panic as she described watching hundreds of zombies throughout the building suddenly stop their aimless wandering and begin moving toward the 7th floor with purposeful determination, their movements synchronized in ways that defied everything the survivors thought they knew about the infected. The research files revealed that Dr. Harrison Mitchell, the lead scientist on Project Genesis, had been working under direct orders from a shadow government organization that had intended to create super soldiers capable of operating as a collective unit, but the experimental treatments had instead produced creatures that retained the hive mind capabilities while losing all traces of human morality and self-control. Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't just fighting mindless monsters, but rather facing an enemy that could think, plan, and coordinate attacks with the collective intelligence of thousands of interconnected minds working toward a single goal. Danny's sniper position came under immediate threat as zombies began appearing on the rooftops of surrounding buildings, moving with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested they understood concepts like flanking maneuvers and coordinated assault strategies. Dr. Walsh's discoveries became even more disturbing as she uncovered evidence that the infection wasn't spreading randomly, but was being directed by what the researchers called alpha hosts, evolved zombies that retained enough cognitive function to serve as field commanders for the growing armies of infected that were systematically hunting down and eliminating human resistance groups across the continent. The laboratory's emergency lighting began flickering as power systems throughout the building started failing, creating an atmosphere of increasing dread as shadows danced across the walls and the team realized they were running out of time before their position became completely untenable. Jake's ammunition count dropped rapidly as wave after wave of zombies pressed against his defensive position, their attacks becoming increasingly sophisticated as they began using fallen bodies as shields and coordinating their movements to probe for weaknesses in his firing angles. The radio chatter revealed that their extraction route had been compromised, with zombie forces positioning themselves at every possible exit point as if they had studied the building's layout and anticipated exactly where the human intruders would attempt to escape. Rebecca's reconnaissance capabilities proved invaluable as she guided Dr. Walsh to additional research terminals throughout the laboratory complex, uncovering backup servers that contained detailed plans for something called Phase 2 of Project Genesis, which apparently involved the deliberate infection of major population centers to create massive armies of networked zombies under centralized control. Marcus felt his military training taking over as he realized they were no longer conducting a simple retrieval mission, but had instead stumbled into what amounted to a war zone where the enemy possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and tactical coordination that rivaled trained military units. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the building as zombies began entering through windows and emergency exits, their movements coordinated to create multiple simultaneous pressure points that would overwhelm any defensive position the team might try to establish. Dr. Walsh's medical expertise allowed her to understand the full implications of the research data, which revealed that the zombie virus continued to evolve and adapt, with newer generations of infected showing increased intelligence, improved motor skills, and enhanced ability to coordinate with other members of their networked collective consciousness. Lisa's knowledge of the building's hidden passages became their only hope for survival as she guided them through maintenance tunnels and emergency routes that the zombies hadn't yet discovered, though the sounds of scratching and digging suggested that even these secret pathways wouldn't remain secure for much longer. The team's communication equipment began picking up strange signals that seemed to originate from the zombie collective itself, electronic pulses and data transmissions that suggested the infected were not only sharing consciousness but were actively using the building's own technology infrastructure to enhance their coordination and communication capabilities. As Marcus helped Dr. Walsh secure the final pieces of research data that might hold the key to understanding and potentially countering the zombie threat, he realized that their discovery had transformed their mission from a desperate search for hope into a race against time to prevent the complete transformation of humanity into a planet-wide network of interconnected predators that would make resistance virtually impossible and turn the Earth into a hunting ground where humans would become nothing more than prey for an enemy that grew stronger, smarter, and more coordinated with each passing day, making their escape not just a matter of personal survival but potentially the last chance to warn the remaining human settlements about the true nature of the threat they were facing. The building's structural integrity began failing as Jake's explosive charges had weakened critical support beams, creating an additional layer of danger as chunks of concrete and twisted metal began raining down on the zombie hordes while simultaneously threatening to crush the human survivors who were now trapped between collapsing infrastructure and an increasingly intelligent enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Dr. Walsh completed the data download just as the laboratory's main computer systems began shutting down, but the information she had retrieved painted an even more terrifying picture of Project Genesis than anyone had imagined, revealing that the shadow organization behind the research had created multiple variants of the virus, each designed for specific tactical purposes including stealth infiltrators, heavy assault units, and command-level alphas that could process information and make strategic decisions with near-human intelligence. Marcus coordinated the team's movement through Lisa's suggested escape route, a series of maintenance shafts that connected to the building's old pneumatic tube system, but Rebecca's voice carried urgent warnings as she reported that zombies throughout the complex were converging on their position with mathematical precision, their movements suggesting they had somehow accessed the building's blueprints and were calculating optimal intercept points. The sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the ventilation system as powerful zombie variants began ripping through supposedly secure barriers, their enhanced strength allowing them to breach defenses that would have stopped normal infected, while their improved cognitive abilities enabled them to solve problems and overcome obstacles that had previously provided reliable protection for human survivors. Jake's defensive position became untenable as zombies began attacking from multiple levels simultaneously, forcing him to abandon his carefully prepared fallback points and rely on mobile tactics that consumed ammunition at an unsustainable rate while the enemy continued to press their advantage through sheer overwhelming numbers and tactical coordination. Danny's sniper position came under direct assault as zombies demonstrated the ability to use crude tools and weapons, hurling debris with startling accuracy while others created human pyramids to reach elevated positions that had previously been considered safe from ground-based attacks. The research data revealed that the virus had been engineered with built-in evolution protocols that allowed infected hosts to develop new capabilities over time, with some variants showing signs of memory retention from their previous human lives, enabling them to access technical knowledge, security codes, and strategic information that made them exponentially more dangerous than mindless monsters. Lisa's intimate knowledge of the building's layout guided them through increasingly narrow passages as the main corridors became choked with debris and zombie forces, but even she expressed concern about the structural damage that was making their planned escape routes potentially impassable or deadly traps that could collapse at any moment. Rebecca's position in the ventilation system became compromised as zombies began demonstrating problem-solving abilities that allowed them to manipulate building systems, shutting off power to specific sections while rerouting air circulation to track the human intruders through scent and air movement patterns. The team's communication equipment detected increasing electronic interference that seemed to originate from the zombie collective itself, suggesting that the infected were not only using the building's technology but were somehow interfacing directly with electronic systems through methods that the original research had never anticipated or documented. Dr. Walsh's analysis of the downloaded files revealed contingency plans for something called Urban Integration Protocol, which described systematic plans for zombie forces to take control of major infrastructure systems including power grids, communication networks, and transportation hubs, transforming cities into coordinated bases of operations for the expanding infected population. Marcus realized that their mission had uncovered evidence of a threat far beyond what the human resistance had been preparing to face, as the zombies weren't just spreading randomly but were actively implementing strategic plans that would give them control over the technological infrastructure that modern civilization depended upon for survival. The sound of approaching helicopters provided a moment of hope until Danny's voice crackled through the radio with the devastating news that the aircraft were being piloted by infected humans who had retained enough cognitive function to operate complex machinery while serving the zombie collective's strategic objectives. Jake's demolition expertise became crucial as he identified structural weak points that could create new escape routes, but his calculations had to account for the building's increasing instability and the risk that any additional explosions might bring the entire complex down on top of them before they could reach safety. The zombie forces began exhibiting what could only be described as tactical patience, pulling back from direct assaults and instead positioning themselves to control all possible exit points while systematically dismantling the building's support systems to force the human team into increasingly desperate situations. Rebecca reported seeing evidence that the zombies were actively studying their movements and adapting their strategies in real time, learning from each encounter and sharing that knowledge instantly across their networked consciousness to counter human tactics and eliminate the advantages that military training and superior weapons had previously provided. Lisa's suggestion to use the building's old bomb shelter system as a temporary refuge provided breathing room, but Dr. Walsh's continued analysis of the research data revealed that the shelter's isolation might actually be a trap, as the zombie collective appeared to have detailed knowledge of the facility's emergency protocols and defensive capabilities. The team faced the horrifying realization that they were not just fighting for their own survival, but were potentially the only people who possessed the knowledge necessary to warn the remaining human settlements that they were facing an enemy capable of long-term strategic planning, technological integration, and evolutionary adaptation that would make traditional resistance tactics obsolete and turn the struggle for humanity's survival into a war against an opponent that was becoming more intelligent, more organized, and more deadly with each passing hour. The bomb shelter's reinforced walls provided temporary protection, but Dr. Walsh's portable analysis equipment revealed that the zombie collective was actively monitoring their electromagnetic signatures, using the building's own sensor networks to track their exact location while simultaneously coordinating a systematic siege that would starve them out or force them into increasingly desperate escape attempts. Marcus studied the research data on his tactical tablet, discovering that the original Project Genesis team had anticipated this exact scenario and had installed hidden countermeasures throughout the facility, including electromagnetic pulse devices that could temporarily disrupt the zombie network's communication abilities. But activating these systems would require accessing the building's central control room, which was located deep in the basement levels that were now completely overrun with infected. Jake's explosive expertise proved invaluable as he identified weak points in the shelter's flooring that could be breached to access the service tunnels below, but Rebecca's reconnaissance revealed that the underground areas were filled with what appeared to be zombie variants that had been specifically adapted for subterranean operations, with enhanced sensory capabilities and improved mobility in confined spaces. The sound of systematic demolition echoed through the building as the zombie forces began methodically destroying structural supports, apparently implementing a strategy designed to collapse specific sections of the facility while leaving their own escape routes intact, demonstrating a level of engineering knowledge that suggested they had retained access to technical expertise from their previous human lives. Danny's sniper position became completely untenable as infected began using coordinated flanking maneuvers that incorporated suppressive tactics, forcing him to abandon his Overwatch role and attempt a dangerous descent through emergency repelling equipment while zombie forces systematically eliminated his backup positions. Lisa's knowledge of the facility's emergency protocols led her to suggest activating the building's emergency lockdown systems, which would seal all exits and trap everyone inside but would also activate powerful ventilation systems that might clear the air of the pheromone markers the zombies were apparently using to coordinate their movements and track human positions. Dr. Walsh's medical training allowed her to recognize that several team members were showing signs of extreme stress and fatigue that could compromise their decision-making abilities, but her analysis of the research data revealed that the zombie virus had evolved mechanisms for detecting stress hormones and elevated heart rates, making their physiological responses to fear and exhaustion into tactical disadvantages that the enemy could exploit. The shelter's communication equipment began receiving strange transmissions that appeared to be coming from other survivor groups throughout the region, but closer analysis revealed that these signals were actually being generated by the Zombie Collective as a psychological warfare tactic designed to create false hope and lure human resistance groups into predetermined ambush zones. Marcus realized that their original extraction plan had been compromised from the beginning, as the zombie forces had apparently anticipated human interest in the research facility and had prepared elaborate traps designed to capture anyone who might attempt to access the Project Genesis data, turning their mission into an elaborate hunting expedition where the humans were the prey. Rebecca's position in the ventilation system became increasingly dangerous as zombies began using coordinated attacks to cut off her escape routes, but her reconnaissance capabilities allowed her to discover that the facility's original research team had constructed hidden laboratories in sections of the building that weren't shown on any official blueprints, potentially providing access to additional research data or escape routes that the Zombie Collective hadn't yet discovered. The research files revealed that Dr. Harrison Mitchell had become increasingly concerned about the ethical implications of Project Genesis during its final stages, leading him to create secret backup protocols that could theoretically reverse the infection process. But accessing these systems would require biological authentication from the original research team members who had all been transformed into zombies during the initial outbreak. Jake's demolition calculations became increasingly complex as he attempted to create controlled explosions that would open new pathways without bringing down the entire shelter, but the building's structural damage was creating unpredictable stress patterns that made precision work extremely dangerous while zombie forces continued their systematic assault on the facility's remaining stable sections. The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the building as the Zombie Collective began employing construction equipment with disturbing proficiency, using bulldozers and excavators to clear debris and create new access points while demonstrating operational knowledge that suggested they had retained and were actively sharing technical expertise across their networked consciousness. Danny's forced retreat brought him into direct contact with zombie variants that displayed enhanced speed and agility, requiring him to employ close-quarters combat techniques while conserving ammunition for the larger threats that the team knew they would inevitably face during any escape attempt. Dr. Walsh's analysis revealed that the zombie virus continued to evolve in real time, with newer infections showing increased resistance to conventional weapons and improved ability to coordinate complex multi-stage operations that required long-term planning and resource management capabilities that rivaled human military organizations. Lisa's emergency protocol knowledge led to the discovery of a maintenance elevator that connected to sub-basement levels that predated the main facility construction, potentially providing access to old mining tunnels that could lead beyond the zombie siege perimeter. But the risks of venturing into unknown underground areas where they could become trapped or lost seemed almost as dangerous as facing the coordinated enemy forces above ground. The team faced the crushing realization that their discovery of the Zombie Collective's true capabilities had transformed their simple retrieval mission into a desperate fight for survival against an enemy that was learning from their every move, adapting its tactics in real time, and systematically eliminating every advantage that human intelligence and military training had previously provided in the ongoing war for the future of civilization itself. The maintenance elevator's ancient mechanisms groaned under the weight of 6 heavily armed survivors as they descended into the facility's forgotten sub-basement levels, where the musty air carried the distinct scent of decay and something else that Dr. Walsh's medical training couldn't immediately identify but that triggered every survival instinct she had developed during months of fighting the infected. Marcus kept his weapon trained on the elevator shaft above them, knowing that the Zombie Collective had demonstrated an unsettling ability to anticipate their movements and that their descent into the underground levels might be exactly what the enemy had been herding them toward all along. The elevator lurched to a stop at a level that wasn't marked on any of the building schematics Lisa had studied, revealing a corridor lined with reinforced steel doors that bore the kind of biohazard warnings typically associated with the most dangerous research projects, suggesting they had discovered the true heart of Project Genesis where the most classified and dangerous experiments had been conducted away from oversight and documentation. Rebecca's reconnaissance equipment detected movement beyond the sealed doors, but the signatures were unlike anything they had encountered before, showing energy patterns that seemed to fluctuate between human and something entirely different, as if the creatures behind those barriers existed in a state of constant biological flux that defied conventional understanding of life and death. Jake's demolition expertise became crucial as they discovered that the corridor's security systems were still partially functional, with automated defenses that had been designed to contain whatever had been created in these underground laboratories, but the passage of time and structural damage had made these systems unpredictable and potentially as dangerous to the survivors as to any escaped test subjects. The research data Dr. Walsh had downloaded began making horrifying sense as they found evidence of human experimentation that had gone far beyond the ethical boundaries of legitimate scientific research, with detailed notes describing voluntary and involuntary test subjects who had been exposed to increasingly concentrated versions of the virus while researchers monitored their psychological and physical transformations in real time. Danny's combat experience proved invaluable as they encountered the first of the basement's inhabitants, creatures that retained enough human intelligence to use basic tools and weapons but had been so thoroughly transformed by experimental treatments that they barely resembled the people they had once been, their bodies showing evidence of deliberate surgical modifications that had enhanced their natural abilities while removing psychological inhibitions about violence and cannibalism. The underground facility's independent power systems were still functioning, revealing laboratory spaces filled with sophisticated equipment that had been used to map the human brain's neural pathways while simultaneously introducing viral modifications designed to create controllable zombie variants that could follow complex instructions while retaining specific skill sets from their previous lives. Marcus realized with growing horror that they had stumbled into what amounted to a prototype factory for creating specialized zombie units, with different laboratory sections dedicated to producing infiltrators who could pass for human, technical specialists who could operate complex machinery, and command units capable of coordinating large-scale military operations across vast geographical areas. Lisa's facility knowledge proved limited in these undocumented areas, but her security training helped them navigate the biometric locks and containment protocols that had been designed to prevent unauthorized access to research materials that could potentially destroy human civilization if they fell into the wrong hands. The sound of systematic drilling echoed through the underground complex as the zombie forces above began attempting to breach the elevator shaft, their coordinated efforts suggesting they had somehow accessed the facility's original construction blueprints and were implementing engineering solutions that would allow them to pursue the human survivors into the deepest levels of the complex. Rebecca's technical skills became essential as they discovered computer terminals containing research notes from Dr. Harrison Mitchell's final experiments, which revealed that he had been attempting to develop a targeted countervirus that could selectively reverse the infection process, but his work had been interrupted by the facility's emergency lockdown procedures when the initial outbreak occurred. The laboratory specimen storage areas contained evidence of successful reversal treatments on laboratory animals, but the human trials had been terminated when test subjects began exhibiting violent reactions that suggested the cure might be more dangerous than the original infection, creating temporarily human individuals who retained the zombie collective's memories and strategic knowledge while regaining their capacity for complex emotional manipulation and deception. Dr. Walsh's medical expertise allowed her to understand the technical documentation, revealing that the countervirus existed but required fresh tissue samples from recently infected individuals to create personalized treatments that could target specific viral mutations, making mass production impossible and limiting any potential cure to small-scale individual treatments that would take months to develop for each patient. Jake's explosive capabilities became their primary hope for creating an exit route through the underground complex, but his calculations had to account for the facility's structural instability and the risk that any detonation might collapse the tunnels or trigger automated security systems that would release additional experimental subjects from their containment areas. The discovery of an emergency communication system allowed them to attempt contact with other survivor groups, but the transmissions they received suggested that zombie forces throughout the region were implementing coordinated attacks on human settlements using tactics and equipment that could only have come from the specialized units created in facilities like the one they were currently trapped within. Marcus faced the devastating realization that their mission had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple viral outbreak, revealing that Project Genesis had been designed from the beginning to create a controllable zombie army that could be used to eliminate human resistance while establishing a new social order where the infected served as an obedient workforce under the command of whoever possessed the technological means to control the collective consciousness that bound them together in an unstoppable network of coordinated destruction. The emergency communication system suddenly erupted with transmissions from survivor settlements across 3 states, all reporting simultaneous coordinated attacks by zombie forces that demonstrated unprecedented tactical sophistication and access to military equipment that should have been impossible for the infected to obtain or operate effectively. Dr. Walsh's hands flew across the laboratory's computer interface as she attempted to synthesize the counter-virus data while Marcus coordinated defensive positions around the laboratory's multiple access points, knowing that their discovery of Project Genesis's true purpose had made them the most valuable targets the zombie collective had ever encountered. The sound of drilling intensified as zombie forces above employed what appeared to be industrial mining equipment, their systematic approach to breaching the underground facility's defenses suggesting they possessed detailed engineering knowledge and unlimited patience to pursue their objectives regardless of the time and resources required. Rebecca's reconnaissance equipment detected massive troop movements throughout the building's upper levels, with zombie variants organizing into specialized units that included technical specialists working to restore power to security systems, assault teams positioning themselves for coordinated breaches, and what appeared to be command units directing the overall operation with military precision that rivaled elite human special forces. Jake's demolition calculations became increasingly desperate as he realized that any explosive powerful enough to create an escape route through the facility's reinforced underground structures would also likely trigger catastrophic collapse that would bury them along with the evidence they had gathered about the conspiracy behind the zombie apocalypse. The laboratory's automated systems began activating in response to the security breach, releasing experimental subjects from containment areas throughout the underground complex, creating an additional layer of threats as creatures that had been subjected to years of viral experimentation began hunting through the corridors with enhanced abilities and virtually no remaining traces of human consciousness or restraint. Danny's combat experience proved crucial as they encountered test subjects that displayed abilities far beyond normal zombie capabilities, including enhanced speed that allowed them to move faster than human reflexes could track, increased strength that enabled them to tear through reinforced barriers, and sensory improvements that made traditional stealth and concealment tactics completely ineffective. Lisa's security knowledge became their only advantage as she guided them through emergency protocols that sealed specific sections of the laboratory complex, but the facility's automated defense systems had been compromised by decades of neglect and were now operating on backup power that could fail at any moment, leaving them trapped in a maze of interconnected chambers with multiple threats converging on their position from all directions. The research data revealed that Dr. Harrison Mitchell had hidden additional countervirus samples in a secured vault that required simultaneous biometric authentication from multiple members of the original research team, but the location of this vault was somewhere in the facility's deepest levels where the most dangerous experiments had been conducted and where the automated containment systems had failed completely during the initial outbreak. Marcus realized that their only hope for survival lay in reaching Mitchell's hidden vault and retrieving the countervirus samples, but the route would take them through areas where experimental subjects had been developing and evolving for months without any human oversight or containment, creating an environment where they would face threats that no human survivor had previously encountered and lived to describe. The zombie collective's systematic approach to breaching their defenses demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that suggested they understood the importance of capturing the human survivors alive, possibly to extract information about resistance operations or to use them as test subjects for new viral experiments that would create even more dangerous variants of the infection. Rebecca's technical skills became essential as she attempted to hack into the facility's security systems to create diversions and obstacles that might slow the zombie advance. But her efforts revealed that the collective had already integrated with the building's computer networks and was actively countering her electronic warfare attempts with programming skills that shouldn't have been possible for creatures that had supposedly lost their higher brain functions. Dr. Walsh's medical expertise allowed her to recognize that the experimental subjects they were encountering showed signs of deliberate genetic modification that went far beyond viral infection, suggesting that the original research team had been using advanced biotechnology to create hybrid creatures that combined the worst aspects of human intelligence with predatory instincts and enhanced physical capabilities that made them perfect weapons for systematic extermination campaigns. The sound of metal being systematically dismantled echoed through the complex as zombie forces employed cutting tools and welding equipment with disturbing proficiency, Their ability to use industrial machinery suggesting they had retained enough technical knowledge to maintain and operate the equipment necessary for large-scale construction and demolition projects that would give them significant advantages in urban warfare scenarios. Jake's explosive expertise became their primary weapon as he rigged improvised devices using laboratory chemicals and equipment, creating diversions that forced the zombie collective to divert resources from their main assault while buying precious time for the team to advance toward Mitchell's hidden vault and the potential salvation it represented. The facility's communication systems began broadcasting what appeared to be surrender offers from the zombie collective, promising safe passage and comfortable imprisonment in exchange for cooperation with their research programs, but the team's experience with the infected had taught them that such negotiations were typically psychological warfare tactics designed to create divisions and exploit human hopes and fears. Lisa's knowledge of emergency protocols led to the discovery of a maintenance shaft that connected directly to the vault level, but accessing this route would require traversing areas where the facility's most dangerous experimental subjects had been contained, including creatures that the research notes described as having retained human intelligence while gaining abilities that made them virtually unstoppable in close-quarters combat situations. The team faced the horrifying realization that their mission to retrieve information about a potential cure had led them into the heart of a conspiracy that threatened not just their own survival, but the future of human civilization itself, as they prepared to make a final desperate attempt to reach the countervirus samples that might represent humanity's last hope for survival against an enemy that was growing stronger, smarter, and more coordinated with each passing moment. The maintenance shaft leading to Mitchell's vault proved to be a nightmare corridor lined with the remnants of the facility's most horrific experiments, where creatures that barely resembled anything that had once been human emerged from the shadows with abilities that defied every assumption the team had made about the limitations of viral infection and genetic modification. Marcus led the desperate advance through chambers filled with experimental subjects that demonstrated impossible combinations of human intelligence and predatory instincts, their attacks coordinated with tactical precision while their enhanced physical capabilities made conventional weapons nearly useless against creatures that could regenerate tissue damage and adapt to combat situations in real time. Dr. Walsh clutched the portable research data while Jake's improvised explosives created temporary barriers against pursuing zombie forces. But the facility's deeper levels revealed the true scope of Project Genesis as they discovered evidence that the original outbreak had been deliberately triggered as a field test for viral weapons that were intended for global deployment by shadow organizations that viewed human civilization as an obstacle to their long-term strategic objectives. The Vault's biometric security systems had been designed to require authentication from the original research team, but Dr. Walsh's medical expertise allowed her to bypass these protocols using tissue samples from infected researchers whose bodies they encountered throughout the complex, revealing that Mitchell had anticipated this exact scenario and had programmed emergency overrides that would allow future survivors to access his countervirus research. Rebecca's reconnaissance skills proved essential as she guided them through the vault's multiple security layers, discovering that Mitchell had created not just a cure for the zombie virus, but detailed plans for manufacturing and distributing the treatment on a massive scale using resources that were still available to organized survivor communities if they could coordinate their efforts and share the necessary technical knowledge. The sound of systematic demolition echoed through the facility as the zombie collective employed heavy machinery to breach the vault's outer defenses, their coordinated assault demonstrating that they understood the strategic importance of preventing human access to the countervirus while simultaneously attempting to capture the research team alive for interrogation and experimentation. Danny's sniper training became crucial as he provided covering fire against zombie variants that had been specifically engineered for close-quarters combat in confined spaces, their enhanced speed and strength making them nearly impossible to stop with conventional weapons while their retained human intelligence allowed them to use tactics and strategies that made them exponentially more dangerous than ordinary infected. The vault's inner chamber contained not only the countervirus samples but also detailed documentation of the conspiracy behind Project Genesis, revealing that multiple governments and private organizations had collaborated to create biological weapons that could be used to control population growth and eliminate political dissent while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement in global genocide. Lisa's security expertise enabled her to activate the vault's emergency transmission systems, broadcasting Mitchell's research data and countervirus formulas to survivor settlements throughout the region while simultaneously triggering automated distress signals that would alert any remaining military units to the location of the research facility and the critical intelligence it contained. Jake's demolition skills became their salvation as he rigged the vault's self-destruct systems to create a controlled explosion that would collapse the facility's upper levels while protecting the team in the reinforced underground chamber. But the blast would also eliminate any chance of escape through conventional routes and force them to rely on Mitchell's emergency evacuation tunnel that connected to natural cave systems beyond the zombie siege perimeter. The zombie collective's final assault on the vault demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice unlimited numbers of infected in order to prevent human access to the countervirus, with specialized variants employing suicide tactics and coordinated attacks that revealed their strategic understanding of the stakes involved in this confrontation. Dr. Walsh completed the countervirus synthesis using the vault's automated laboratory equipment, creating enough samples to treat several hundred infected individuals while simultaneously preparing detailed manufacturing instructions that could be transmitted to other survivor communities with the necessary technical resources and medical expertise. Marcus coordinated the team's final defensive positions as zombie forces breached the vault's outer barriers, knowing that their success in retrieving and broadcasting the countervirus information had transformed their desperate survival mission into a strategic victory that could potentially turn the tide of humanity's war against the infected, even if it cost them their lives in the process. The emergency evacuation tunnel that Mitchell had constructed as a failsafe proved to be their salvation, providing access to underground river systems that carried them beyond the facility's immediate area while Jake's timed explosions brought down the entire research complex, destroying the zombie forces that had been besieging them while eliminating the physical evidence of the conspiracy behind Project Genesis. Rebecca's communication equipment maintained contact with survivor settlements throughout their underground escape, confirming that Mitchell's research data and countervirus formulas were being successfully received and analyzed by medical teams who were already beginning to produce treatments for infected individuals in their communities. The team's emergence from the cave system 3 days later marked not just their personal survival against impossible odds, but the beginning of humanity's first real hope for victory against the zombie apocalypse. As survivor communities across the continent began implementing large-scale countervirus production while using Mitchell's intelligence about the conspiracy to identify and eliminate the remaining shadow organization facilities that continued to produce specialized zombie variants. Danny's final transmission to their home base confirmed that the mission had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, with the broadcast research data enabling survivor communities to not only begin curing infected individuals but also to develop defensive strategies against the zombie collective's coordinated tactics, marking the turning point in humanity's struggle for survival and the beginning of a new phase in the war where humans could finally fight back against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable just days before, transforming their desperate mission into the foundation for humanity's eventual victory and the restoration of civilization from the ashes of the zombie apocalypse.